The eye between the opposites. Part 1, the glint, the great eye, and the dream of God. There are many things we overlook precisely because they are always before us. The familiar becomes invisible, not because it is hidden, but because we have ceased to contemplate it. One of the simplest examples is the tiny glint that appears upon the human eye whenever light is present. We see it every day in ourselves and in others, yet we rarely ask what it signifies. That glint may be contemplated symbolically as a gaze from the twinkling of God's eye. This is not a scientific statement, nor an attempt to describe physical reality. It is symbolic philosophy. Symbols are not measurements. They are contemplative forms through which deeper patterns become visible. They belong to the language of mysticism, philosophy, and revelation rather than to empirical proof. They point beyond themselves. Imagine, then, an immeasurably great eye. Do not imagine yourself standing before it, but already existing within it. Consciousness itself is symbolically suspended within the still center of this immense eye. The center is not an empty space in the ordinary sense. There are two entirely different meanings of emptiness. One meaning belongs to the world of objects. A cup that once contained water may later be called empty because its contents have been removed. This is the ordinary language of absence. The other points toward ineffable. Here the distinction between fullness and emptiness no longer applies. It is not an empty container waiting to be filled, nor something that was once full and has become vacant. It lies beyond those opposites altogether. Symbolic philosophy eventually arrives here because its highest symbols cannot be reduced to measurable things. Within this great eye, the iris becomes the symbolic earth. It need not be understood as a globe or as a flat plane. Rather, it may be contemplated as something resembling a torus, a form that curves continually back into itself, expressing circulation, return, and perpetual relationship. This is not a claim about geography or cosmology. It is symbolic geometry, where form expresses principle rather than physical measurement. Consciousness abides within the center while the living world surrounds it. The eye itself becomes an image of manifestation. The cornea now assumes profound importance. Every illuminated eye carries a point of reflected light upon its surface. This tiny glint is easily dismissed as an optical effect, yet symbolically it becomes the first visible sign of an invisible source. Just as our own eyes receive light from a world beyond themselves, so the great symbolic eye receives illumination from beyond the realm it contains. The source remains unseen, yet its presence is revealed through the glint upon the cornea. What is invisible announces itself through what becomes visible. This leads to one of the great symbolic inversions. The darkness beyond the eye is not the absence of light. It is the divine light of darkness. Light itself is invisible. What we ordinarily call light is actually its manifestation, illumination, reflection, shadow, color, and form. We never behold light in itself. We behold its activity. The glint upon the eye is therefore not merely a reflection, but a symbolic declaration that an unseen source is forever giving itself to the world without ever becoming an object within it. From this invisible source comes perception. Light enters the eye. Perception gives rise to suggestion. Suggestion gives rise to thought. Thought gives rise to imagination. Imagination unfolds into the dream through which experience becomes possible. The eye therefore becomes a symbol of projection, not in the sense of illusion alone, but as the living process through which the unseen continually gives rise to the seen. Reality is animated by an invisible principle that forever expresses itself through visible forms. For this reason, the five senses may also be contemplated as one. Sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell are distinct in their operation, yet each is fundamentally a mode of perception. Each is a way in which consciousness beholds reality. Every sense is, symbolically speaking, another form of seeing. Reality itself may then be understood as the dream of God. This does not mean that existence is unreal. Rather, it means that this is the realm in which distinction becomes possible. Only here can a thing be called a thing. Only here can separation appear. Only here can memory and forgetting exist together. Only here can ignorance give way to understanding, trial give way to wisdom, and possibility become achievement. Within this symbolic dream arise all the conditions necessary for experience. Questions can be asked because answers are not yet known. Mistakes can be made because truth has not yet been realized. Character may be shaped because resistance exists. The soul may be refined because opposition is encountered. Here alone ideas may arise, be contemplated, tested, forgotten, remembered, and ultimately embodied. The great eye is therefore not merely an image of perception. It is a symbol of the entire arena in which consciousness awakens to itself. The glint upon its surface, the living earth within its iris, the stillness of its center, and the invisible light beyond it together express a single symbolic revelation. All manifestation proceeds from what cannot itself be directly seen, and every visible thing quietly bears witness to the unseen source from which it comes. The universe reveals itself through correspondence. Reality does not merely repeat patterns, it speaks through them. A principle appears in one place, then reappears in another under a different form. What first seems unrelated gradually discloses itself as another expression of the same underlying order. This is the meaning of as above, so below, as within, so without. It is not two separate movements, but one reality revealing itself through different scales of manifestation. These correspondences are not mechanical equations. They're symbolic recognitions. They are intuitive, remembered, personal, divine, and paradoxical. They are discovered through contemplation rather than constructed through calculation. Certain numbers continually emerge because they express recurring structures within manifestation. Among the most significant are 5, 7, and 12. 5 represents the elemental differentiation through which experience begins to unfold. Across traditions, it appears again and again. The 5 books of the Torah, the 5 pillars of Islam, the 5 elements in various philosophical systems. Although different civilizations describe these elements differently, earth, water, fire, air, ether in one tradition, wood and metal in another, the underlying impulse remains the same. Reality first divides into fundamental modes through which experience becomes possible. 7 introduces a higher order. It signifies organization, harmony, and principle. The 7 Hermetic principles, the 7-fold symbolic structures found throughout religious traditions, and the recurring appearance of 7 in sacred cosmologies all point toward a reality that has moved beyond simple differentiation into ordered relationship. Even where traditions differ historically, the symbolic recurrence of 7 deserves contemplation. 5 and 7 are not isolated numbers. They interlock. When the elemental foundation and the ordering principle unite, manifestation expresses itself through 12. 12 becomes the language through which correspondence unfolds across the visible world. This is why 12 appears repeatedly throughout history. The 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 cranial nerves, the 12 systems of the human body, the 12 apostles, the 12 titans. Whether these systems arose independently or through historical influence is secondary to the symbolic observation. Reality continually presents itself through 12-fold organization. The repetition itself invites contemplation. The same symbolic principle may also be extended to the earth. One may contemplate 12 great expressions of the living world, not as an established scientific doctrine, but as a symbolic correspondence. Oceans, mountains, volcanic forces, atmospheric movements, climates, waters, and other planetary expressions become living reflections of the same archetypal order. The titans themselves may likewise be contemplated as symbolic intelligences corresponding to these expressions of nature, not because mythology requires it, but because symbolic philosophy recognizes relationships where ordinary categorization sees only separate subjects. None of these correspondences stand alone. The heavens correspond with the mind. The mind corresponds with the body. The body corresponds with the earth. The earth corresponds with the heavens. Each level reflects every other level without becoming identical to it. For this reason, symbolic philosophy proceeds differently from analytical thought. It does not seek to reduce reality to isolated parts. Instead, it seeks to perceive the living relationships that unite all parts into a single symbolic whole. Every correspondence becomes another way of contemplating the same underlying principle. Even apparent asymmetry belongs to this order. Reality does not merely mirror itself with perfect symmetry. It unfolds through paradox. Opposites are not enemies, but complementary expressions whose relationship gives rise to manifestation itself. The movement from above to below is simultaneously the movement from within to without. Each reveals the other without becoming the other. This is why symbolic understanding cannot be confined to mathematics alone. Mathematics measures relationships that can be expressed quantitatively. Symbolic philosophy contemplates relationships whose significance exceeds numerical description. Number itself becomes a language rather than merely a quantity. 5, 7, and 12 are therefore not only counts, they are archetypal forms through which consciousness recognizes recurring patterns woven throughout existence. When these correspondences are contemplated together, the universe begins to appear less like a collection of disconnected objects and more like a single symbolic revelation expressing itself through countless forms. The eye, the body, the earth, the heavens, sacred traditions, mythology, and number all become different languages speaking of one reality from different directions. If reality is contemplated symbolically, then it may also be contemplated as the dream of God. This must not be understood as though reality were unreal or merely imagined. Rather, the dream is the symbolic realm in which distinction becomes possible. Outside of distinction, there is nothing to compare, nothing to remember, nothing to pursue, nothing to overcome. There is no question because there is no answer waiting to be discovered. There is no ignorance because there is no knowledge standing opposite it. There is no achievement because nothing remains unfinished. Within the dream, however, everything becomes possible. Only here can a thing be called a thing. Only here can separation appear. Only here can ideas arise and become objects of contemplation. Only here can memory and forgetting coexist. Only here can trial and error shape understanding. Only here can the soul be molded through experience. Life, therefore, becomes neither punishment nor accident, but the symbolic field within which consciousness comes to know itself. Every experience becomes material for transformation. Every mistake becomes instruction. Every obstacle becomes an opportunity for refinement. Just as a sculptor removes stone to reveal the form hidden within, experience gradually reveals what has always been present beneath illusion and confusion. The great eye symbolizes this entire process. The invisible light shines upon the eye from beyond manifestation. The cornea receives the glint. The iris becomes the living world. Consciousness abides within the still center, while the whole symbolic universe unfolds around it. What appears outwardly as the world is simultaneously an inward revelation of consciousness itself. The senses participate in this revelation. Sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell appear different, yet each is fundamentally an act of perception. Each presents consciousness with another aspect of this same symbolic reality. Every sense is therefore another mode of seeing. The visible world continually offers symbols. Most pass unnoticed because familiarity conceals significance. The glint upon the eye, the reflection upon water, the sheen upon living skin, the movement of light across the world, these ordinary appearances quietly point toward extraordinary principles for those willing to contemplate them. Reality itself becomes a language. The body speaks. The earth speaks. The heavens speak. Sacred traditions speak. Mythology speaks. Number speaks. Each speaks in symbols, and each reflects the same underlying order without exhausting it. For this reason, symbolic philosophy does not seek to invent meaning, but to recognize correspondence. Truth is disclosed through relationships rather than isolated facts. What appears above finds its reflection below. What appears within finds its reflection without. The same principle expresses itself through different forms while remaining one principle. The world then ceases to be merely a collection of objects. It becomes a living revelation, inviting contemplation at every scale. Every genuine symbol opens onto another symbol, and together they form a single tapestry through which consciousness gradually awakens to the order that has always surrounded it. The symbolic world is not constructed by forcing unrelated things together. It is revealed by recognizing that reality continually expresses the same principles through different forms. The purpose of symbolism is not to prove an argument, but to cultivate perception. It teaches us to see relationships where we once saw only isolated objects. This is why no single tradition possesses the whole picture by itself. Each preserves particular symbols, numbers, images, and principles that illuminate one another. When contemplated together, they reveal a greater correspondence without losing their individual integrity. The Torah begins with 5 books. Islam preserves the 5 pillars. Many philosophical traditions contemplate 5 elemental expressions through which manifestation becomes articulated, though they do not always define those elements in the same way. Some speak of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Others speak of earth, water, fire, wood, and metal. The names differ, but the symbolic impulse remains. Manifestation first differentiates itself into foundational modes. 7 then appears as another recurring expression of order. The Hermetic tradition preserves 7 principles. Certain Islamic traditions speak of 7 pillars or 7 foundational obligations. 7 repeatedly emerges wherever reality is contemplated as an ordered whole rather than merely a collection of separate parts. 5 and 7 are not rivals. Together they unfold into 12. This is why 12 echoes throughout sacred history and symbolic thought. 12 becomes the language of completed manifestation. It appears in the zodiac, in the apostles, in the cranial nerves, in the body, and in many other structures that invite contemplation. The recurrence itself is meaningful. Reality seems to delight in expressing itself through the same symbolic architecture across many different levels of existence. The same principle extends into mythology. The Titans need not be understood merely as ancient personalities. They may be contemplated as symbolic expressions of the living powers through which the earth continually manifests itself. Oceans, mountains, storms, fertility, memory, order, light, and countless other aspects of existence may all be approached as symbolic intelligences rather than merely physical events. Mythology, viewed this way, is another language through which reality speaks. The Vedas, the Gospels, the Torah, the Hermetic writings, Buddhist teachings, and many other sacred traditions each preserve fragments of a greater symbolic conversation. Their value is not found merely in historical chronology, but in the recurring principles that appear through them. The 4 Gospels, the 4 Vedas, the 4 Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, the 10 Commandments, the Sephirot. Each introduces another symbolic rhythm through which consciousness may contemplate the structure of reality. These numbers are not simply counted. They are contemplated. They disclose relationships. They become doorways through which deeper patterns reveal themselves. For this reason, symbolic philosophy depends upon intuition as much as analysis. Intuition does not oppose reason. It perceives relationships before reason organizes them into language. Memory also participates, not merely personal memory, but the sense that certain symbols are somehow already familiar, as though they have always belonged to the structure of consciousness itself. Thus, symbolic understanding becomes simultaneously intuitive and remembered, personal and universal, human and divine. It proceeds through paradox because reality itself continually presents complementary opposites whose apparent contradiction conceals a deeper unity. To contemplate symbols in this way is not to escape the world. It is to recognize that the world itself is continually speaking. Every tradition preserves part of the conversation. Every genuine symbol reflects another. Every correspondence becomes another invitation to perceive the hidden order that quietly reveals itself through all things. Every genuine symbol points beyond itself. It is never merely the object that is seen, but the principle that the object quietly reveals. To look symbolically is not to abandon the world, but to behold it more deeply. The eye is therefore not only an organ of vision. It is a symbolic pattern through which reality may be contemplated. The glint, the cornea, the iris, the pupil, the invisible light, and the surrounding darkness all become expressions of a single living mystery. None of them stand alone. Each receives its meaning through its relationship to the others. This is why reality cannot be understood merely by separating it into isolated pieces. Everything participates in everything else. The body reflects the earth. The earth reflects the heavens. The heavens reflect consciousness. Consciousness reflects the divine. Each level becomes another expression of the same underlying order. The human being, therefore, becomes a living correspondence. The mind, the hemispheres of the brain, the cranial nerves, the systems of the body, the senses, the heart with its living electrical activity. All of these may be contemplated symbolically as participating in one continuous revelation. They are not merely biological structures, but symbols through which consciousness comes to know itself. The same is true of the world, the heavens, the zodiac, the earth. Its living powers, its cycles, its elements, its great symbolic orders. None of these need be regarded as isolated subjects. Each reflects every other according to correspondence. What appears outwardly is simultaneously an inward principle. What appears inwardly is expressed outwardly. Thus, as above, so below, as within, so without, becomes one continuous movement rather than two separate directions. Reality is therefore not simply observed. It is interpreted. Not through arbitrary imagination, but through contemplative recognition. Patterns emerge. Numbers recur. Symbols return. The same truths quietly reveal themselves through different traditions, different civilizations, different myths, and different sacred languages. Each preserves a fragment. Each becomes another doorway through which the whole may be contemplated. This is why symbolic philosophy can never be exhausted. Every genuine insight opens another. Every correspondence reveals another correspondence. Every symbol becomes the beginning of another contemplation rather than the end of one. The purpose is not to collect symbols endlessly, nor to force every pattern into agreement. The purpose is to cultivate perception until reality itself begins to speak through its own forms. When that begins to happen, the ordinary is no longer merely ordinary. The glint upon the eye is no longer just reflected light. The heavens are no longer only distant stars. The earth is no longer merely ground beneath our feet. The body is no longer merely flesh. The senses are no longer merely mechanisms. Everything becomes a living language. Reality itself becomes revelation, quietly disclosing its order through correspondence, symbolism, intuition, and paradox to those who learn not only to look, but to truly see. To contemplate reality symbolically is not to escape reality, but to encounter it more completely. The symbolic world does not replace the physical world. Rather, the physical world becomes one expression of a deeper order continually revealing itself through visible forms. Every tradition begins by observing the world, yet the great contemplative traditions eventually discover that observation alone is not enough. There must also be recognition. The eye must learn not merely to see objects, but to perceive principles. This is why the same symbolic structures appear throughout history. They are not valuable simply because they are ancient. They are valuable because they continually point beyond themselves. The Torah, the Vedas, the Gospels, the Hermetic writings, the teachings of Buddhism, the wisdom of Taoism, the symbolic language of mythology. Each preserves another doorway into contemplation. None stand in complete isolation. Each contributes another perspective from which the same reality may be approached. The purpose is not to flatten every tradition into one indistinguishable system, but to perceive the correspondences that quietly unite them while allowing each to retain its own language. Symbolism therefore proceeds through recognition rather than reduction. The world becomes intelligible because relationships begin to reveal themselves. The heavens correspond with the earth corresponds with the body corresponds with consciousness corresponds with the divine. Each level illuminates the others. Nothing exists entirely by itself. Nothing is understood completely in isolation. Everything participates in a greater whole. This is why paradox continually appears. Reality separates in order to reveal unity. Multiplicity discloses oneness. Difference makes relationship possible. Relationship gives meaning to distinction. Without distinction, there could be no knowledge. Without relationship, there could be no understanding. The symbolic world therefore exists as the meeting place between unity and multiplicity. It is where the invisible continually becomes visible without ever exhausting the mystery from which it proceeds. When we contemplate the world in this way, ordinary life itself becomes philosophical instruction, a reflection upon water, the glint upon an eye, the movement of light across a room, the rhythm of the seasons, the order of the heavens, the structure of the body, the language of number. None of these are merely accidental observations. Each becomes another invitation to contemplate the principles that quietly sustain the whole. Knowledge then ceases to be merely the accumulation of information. Wisdom begins when relationships are perceived. Understanding deepens when those relationships are contemplated until they disclose a unity that cannot be forced into language, yet continually expresses itself through language, symbol, and experience. The world becomes a living scripture, written not only in books, but in light, form, number, memory, perception, and consciousness itself. Every genuine symbol becomes another verse in that scripture, quietly inviting us to look again at what has always been before our eyes. At a certain point, symbolic philosophy reaches its own boundary. It can point. It can illuminate. It can reveal correspondence. Yet it cannot finally replace direct contemplation. Every symbol exists to carry the mind to the edge of what can be spoken. Once that threshold is reached, the symbol has fulfilled its purpose. Beyond that point, understanding is no longer accumulated merely through words, but through contemplation itself. This is why the highest symbols continually return to paradox. The invisible gives rise to the visible. Stillness gives rise to motion. Silence gives rise to sound. Unity gives rise to multiplicity. The dream gives rise to experience. None of these opposites abolish one another. They require one another in order for manifestation to appear. For this reason, reality may be contemplated as a continual revelation rather than a completed explanation. Every discovery opens another question. Every answer reveals another mystery. Wisdom, therefore, is not the possession of final conclusions, but the continual refinement of perception. The symbolic eye reminds us of this. Its glint reminds us that the unseen continually touches the seen. Its cornea reminds us that revelation always arrives through a meeting between what lies beyond and what becomes manifest. Its iris reminds us that the living world is not merely scenery, but a field of correspondence. Its pupil reminds us that consciousness itself abides within a still center from which experience unfolds. The entire image becomes a map, not of physical space, but of contemplative awareness. When the same principles are recognized in sacred traditions, mythology, number, the body, the heavens, and the earth, they cease to appear as isolated observations. They become a single conversation spoken through many languages. One tradition emphasizes number. Another emphasizes law. Another emphasizes myth. Another emphasizes meditation. Another emphasizes philosophy. None need be rejected for another to be appreciated. Each preserves a symbolic vocabulary through which the same reality may be contemplated from another direction. The purpose is not to force agreement where differences genuinely exist, nor to erase distinctions between traditions. Rather, it is to recognize that truth often reveals itself through correspondence instead of repetition. The same principle may appear under different names, different symbols, and different forms while remaining recognizably related. Reality, therefore, becomes something to contemplate rather than merely something to analyze. The philosopher learns to ask. The mystic learns to behold. The symbolic thinker learns to recognize. When these become one movement, the world itself begins to disclose meanings that cannot be manufactured by imagination alone. The ordinary becomes transparent to the extraordinary. The visible quietly bears witness to the invisible. Every genuine symbol becomes an invitation to look more deeply until what once appeared commonplace is recognized as participating in a greater and more enduring order. Amen. Let it be so.